In the early hours of August 19th, 1953, the streets of Tehran exploded in violence.
Further pictures from Tehran show rioters in action as anti-royalist partisans, supporters of the aged Dr. Mossadegh, set about their work of destruction.
By nightfall, Iran's democratic government would fall, toppled by an American spy operating from a basement in the U.S. Embassy.
Even with your enemies, even with your adversaries, I do think that you have to have the capacity to put yourself occasionally in their shoes.
The consequences would echo across decades, shaping the modern Middle East and America's place in the world.
You know, if you look at Iranian history, the fact is that we had some involvement with overthrowing a democratically elected regime in Iran.
To understand this pivotal moment, we must first understand Iran, ancient Persia, a civilization that stretched back to Cyrus and Darius. For centuries, Iran had absorbed foreign influences while maintaining its distinct identity. But by the dawn of the 20th century, the country had fallen under the shadow of a new empire.
Well, I was running all the mechanical equipment operating in the whole of Abadan areas and South Khorasan.
How long have you been out there, sir?
Well, I've been out in my last period 2 years.
Britain. In 1908, beneath Iran's soil, British prospectors discovered an ocean of oil. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company built the world's largest refinery at Abadan. Here, Iranian workers lived in slums without electricity or running water, while British managers enjoyed tennis courts and swimming pools behind segregated fences.
I see, but you've been out there a long time altogether, haven't you?
Well, I've been in actually Iraq and Persia for the last 31 years.
The crown jewel of the British Empire was paying Iran just 16% of the profits from its own oil. Iran's weak Qajar dynasty sold concession after concession to foreign powers. But in 1891, when the Shah sold Iran's entire tobacco industry to a British company, something remarkable happened. Religious leaders called for a nationwide boycott. Even the women of the Shah's harem put down their pipes. The Shah was forced to cancel the concession. For the first time, Iranians had successfully resisted foreign control. This spirit of resistance would find its champion in Mohammad Mossadegh. Born to aristocracy, educated in Europe, he was a passionate believer in democracy and the rule of law. When British pressure forced Iran's parliament to accept the humiliating Anglo-Persian Agreement of 1919, Mossadegh emerged as the voice of Iranian nationalism.
One of his rare appearances, Mohammad Mossadegh, Premier of Iran, meets the press to reaffirm his government's unwillingness to arbitrate with Britain over nationalizing the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. With chances of a settlement fading, the West's best hope is that this sickly man, in whose frail hands may lie the key to peace, is as anti-Russian as he is anti-British.
By 1951, Mossadegh had become prime minister on a promise to nationalize Iran's oil industry. Time magazine named him Man of the Year. But Britain would not let its most valuable foreign asset slip away without a fight. The British response was swift and severe. They imposed a worldwide embargo on Iranian oil. Their warships patrolled the Persian Gulf, turning away any tanker that tried to buy Iran's stolen oil. But Mossadegh wouldn't bend. When British intelligence agents began plotting a coup, he expelled them all from Iran.
It's a pity that we had to leave them, but they feel that they can carry on themselves. Well, and I see no reason why they shouldn't have a go, but I'm certain they can't.
The British turned to America for help. President Truman refused. He sympathized with Iran's nationalist aspirations and didn't want America drawn into colonial conflicts.
Risks of world war or weak actions which would reward aggression.
President Truman's luncheon guest for their first meeting. The Premier is urged to try for peaceful agreement in the quarrel over Iran's nationalization of British oil holdings. And the world hopes that from this friendly get-together, some solution will emerge.
There are people who say that we, with regard to the CIA, are waging a secret war with an invisible government.
We are obviously engaged in many facets of what is generally called the Cold War.
But in 1953, a new administration took power. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles and his brother Alan, head of the CIA, saw Iran through the lens of the Cold War. To them, any nationalist movement could become a gateway for Soviet influence. Their chosen instrument would be Kermit Roosevelt, grandson of Theodore Roosevelt.
British volunteers for Finland had a democratic chat with Colonel Kermit Roosevelt before leaving to join in the war in the north. The colonel is a relative of President Roosevelt. He has been placed in command of the British force in the International Brigade.
A master of espionage, Roosevelt arrived in Tehran with $1 million in cash and a bold plan. Mobilize Iran's street gangs and religious leaders, bribe military officers and newspaper editors, and spark chaos in the streets, all to create the illusion that Iran was spiraling out of control. Roosevelt's first task was to win over Iran's young Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The Shah was reluctant. He had watched his father be deposed by the British and feared the same fate. But Roosevelt had help. The Shah's forceful twin sister, Princess Ashraf.
To Heathrow comes the Princess Ashraf of Persia, twin sister of Reza Shah Pahlavi. From America, the princess comes to Britain to study our nursing and social services, and several London hospitals and child welfare clinics are on her visiting list.
British agents had won over with cash and a mink coat. Finally, the Shah signed two crucial decrees, one dismissing Mossadegh, the other naming General Fazlollah Zahedi as prime minister. The coup was set for August 15th. That night, Colonel Nematollah Nasiri led a column of tanks to arrest Mossadegh. But Mossadegh had been warned.
The Shah and his queen arrive in Rome after an alleged attempt by the Imperial Guard to arrest Dr. Mossadegh and a refusal by the Shah to dissolve Parliament at Mossadegh's request.
The Shah, hearing of the failure, fled to Baghdad and then Rome. The coup had failed spectacularly. The CIA ordered Roosevelt to abandon the mission. Instead, he doubled down. He flooded Tehran streets with hired demonstrators. Among them were circus strongmen and traditional athletes, bare-chested and wielding heavy clubs. They posed as pro-Mossadegh communists, smashing shop windows and attacking mosques to stir public outrage. Mossadegh, ever the constitutionalist, ordered police not to interfere with peaceful protest. It was a fatal mistake. Within days, Roosevelt's agents switched tactics. Now they marched as anti-Mossadegh royalists, backed by military units whose commanders had been bribed.
300 killed and hundreds wounded is a conservative estimate. The rioters freed those taken prisoner earlier and stormed the house of Mossadegh.
By August 19th, tanks surrounded Mossadegh's house. After hours of fighting that left hundreds dead, the 70-year-old prime minister surrendered. Democracy in Iran was over.
Former Premier Mossadegh's ruined house is a mute testimony to 3 days of bloody rioting, culminating in a military coup from which the one-time dictator of Iran fled for his life.
The Shah returned triumphant to Iran. He would rule as an autocrat for 25 years, his brutal regime backed by American support. The CIA trained his feared secret police, SAVAK, while billions in oil revenue bought weapons instead of schools and hospitals. Mossadegh was tried for treason by a military tribunal. He spent 3 years in prison, then 11 more under house arrest. He died in 1967, his name nearly erased from Iranian history.
The president and the Shah met for about an hour this morning. The president said the Shah's visit was encouraging and had strengthened the strong ties of friendship between the two countries.
When revolution finally swept the Shah from power in 1979, it wasn't the Democrats who took control, but Islamic fundamentalists who saw America as the great Satan.
University students demonstrating in Tehran shouting death to the Shah pledge allegiance to the Islamic movement of the Ayatollahs.
The number killed in Tehran since the beginning of the month is probably well over 100. But people in this crowd were saying and believing 7,000 had been killed.
Young revolutionaries seized the U.S. Embassy, holding 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. They remembered how the same embassy had served as the headquarters for Mossadegh's overthrow. The consequences rippled outward. Iran's new regime supported militant groups across the Middle East. The United States backed Iraq in its 8-year war with Iran, inadvertently strengthening Saddam Hussein. The hostility between Washington and Tehran poisoned America's relationship with the Muslim world. Operation Ajax became a template for CIA interventions across the globe: Guatemala, Congo, Chile. But its greatest legacy may be what it teaches us about the limits of power. The coup succeeded in its immediate aim, securing Iran's oil for the West.
The present actions and threats of the Iranian government are such that if they continue, they may render it impossible to execute a judgment in favor of the United Kingdom.
But it fueled a fierce anti-Americanism that erupted in Islamic revolution, hostage-taking, and decades of conflict.
We think the crisis in Iran is more urgent right now than the campaign here at home. Some 60 Americans, including our fellow citizen whom you just saw bound and blindfolded, are now beginning their 6th day of captivity inside the U.S. Embassy in Tehran.
Today, as tensions persist between the United States and Iran, the echoes of 1953 still reverberate. It stands as a warning. When great powers intervene to shape the destiny of other nations, the consequences can echo far beyond anything they imagined.
In the capital, chants called for the death to the dictator, aimed at Iran's supreme leader.
For many Americans, the hostage crisis of 1979 seemed to come out of nowhere, an explosion of irrational hatred. But for Iranians, it was the bitter fruit of 1953, when America chose to overthrow their democracy in favor of a dictator. The lesson of Operation Ajax endures. In the complex web of international relations, actions that seem clever in the moment can unleash forces that no one can control. As one CIA officer involved in the coup reflected years later, "We got rid of a madman, but we got in his place a monster." If you want to learn more about hidden events that shaped our world, subscribe to Proven Conspiracies and hit that notification bell. Each week, we uncover another historical conspiracy that changed the course of history. What do you think about Operation Ajax? Was America justified in overthrowing Iran's democracy? Let us know in the comments below. Like this video if you want to see more episodes about CIA operations.